The first thing they took was the sound, our bells, silenced. The second was the light, our candles, extinguished. But the last thing they wanted, the faith buried deep in our bones, they would have to tear that out themselves. From her place on the cold chapel floor, Sister Magdalena listened. She was 17, and her world had only ever been the scent of beeswax, the murmur of prayer, and the chime of the hourly bells across the hills of Thessaly. Now, the bells were silent. A new sound had replaced them. A low, guttural roar that vibrated through the stone, up her spine, and into her teeth. It was the sound of an empire on the move. On the horizon, through the chapel's narrow windows, the sky shimmered with heat not from the sun. Ottoman banners, red as fresh blood, fluttered against the gray autumn sky. Dust, smelling of lime and forgotten centuries, rained down from the frescoed ceiling as another tremor shook the walls. Magdalena squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she clutched the wooden beads of her rosary. Abbess Eleni stood before the altar, her back to them, a lone, unbending figure against the chaos. She held the convent's silver crucifix, a relic that had survived storms and droughts for 100 years. Hold your vows in your hearts. The abbess had commanded them hours before, her voice a low anchor in the rising sea of their fear. That they cannot take. She was wrong. A splintering crash, louder than thunder, ripped the world apart. The great oak gates, blessed and barred, shattered inward. The roar from outside became a flood of distinct, terrifying sounds. The guttural shouts of men, the clash of steel, the splintering of wood. Men poured into their sanctuary, shadows given form. Their faces bearded and grim under iron helmets. They smelled of sweat, leather, and something burnt. Their curved scimitars caught the flickering light of the last altar candles as they swept through the chapel, overturning pews and tearing down icons with chilling efficiency. The hymns died in the sisters' throats, replaced by the ragged, sharp sound of screams. Magdalena felt herself hauled to her feet, the rough grip of a soldier's gauntlet bruising her arm. She saw Sister Thea, her face a mask of disbelief, stumble and fall, her white veil instantly trampled into the dirt by muddy boots. This was not a battle. It was a desecration. They were herded like livestock into the central courtyard, where the crisp autumn air was now thick with black smoke from the burning refectory. Torchlight threw their shadows, long and distorted, against the crumbling walls. The Ottoman captain, a man with a beard braided with silver wire, stood in the center of the chaos. He had the abbess dragged before him. Eleni did not struggle. She walked with a terrible dignity, her gaze fixed on him, the silver crucifix still clutched in her hand. Through a nervous-looking translator, the captain made his offer, his voice flat and bored, as if this was a tiresome but necessary piece of administration. Renounce her God. Accept the faith of the conquerors. Her sisters would be spared. A dreadful silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the hungry crackle of the flames. Magdalena held her breath, watching, praying for a miracle that she knew would not come. She saw the hope flicker and die in the eyes of the sisters huddled around her. Abbess Eleni's reply was quiet, yet it seemed to slice through the noise and the smoke. I have already given my life. What else is there for you to take? For a fleeting moment, the captain hesitated. Magdalena saw something shift in his hard eyes, not pity, but a flicker of grudging respect for a will as unbending as his own. Then, it was gone. He turned his back, a dismissive, final gesture, leaving the abbess to his men. Magdalena screwed her eyes shut, pressing her face into the shoulder of the sister next to her, but she could not block out the sound, a wet, final thud that had already burned itself into her memory. When she dared to look again, the silver crucifix lay glinting in the dust near a spreading pool of darkness. The march south began at dawn. 22 women, ankle-bound, stumbling in torn and soot-stained habits. The world outside the cloister was a revelation of cruelty. The sun was a hammer in a brassy sky. The road was paved with stones that felt sharp as teeth against their worn leather sandals. Thirst became a living thing, a claw in Magdalena's throat. When one of the older sisters fell, 2 others would hoist her up, their shared silence a stronger bond than any rope. The abbess's last words, passed in whispers from one to another, became their only prayer. If you cannot hold the cross, hold each other. After 7 days that felt like 7 years, they reached the port of Volos. The sea, a shimmering, indifferent blue, promised not freedom, but a different cage. Ottoman galleys waited at anchor, their sails like shrouds against the sky. They were herded aboard, wrists shackled to wooden benches slick with salt and the filth of those who had come before criminals, slaves, other conquered souls. As the sails caught the wind and the shores of Greece faded into a hazy, dreamlike line, Magdalena felt a piece of her soul tear away with it. The ship's overseer, a man named Yusef Aga, kept meticulous records in a heavy leather-bound ledger. Cargo, spices, coins, textiles. And on a new page, under a fresh heading, Religious Captives, 22, from Thessaly. It was this very ledger, discovered centuries later in the Istanbul archives, that would confirm their story was not just a tragic legend. The 12-day voyage was a purgatory of storms and silence. Salt spray stung the sores on their ankles. Hunger hollowed their faces. Yet what broke their spirits most was not the pain, but the silence. No one spoke to them except to bark commands. At night, chained to the benches, Magdalena began to whisper psalms beneath her breath. The Latin words, a secret comfort against the crashing waves. Her voice was faint. But other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians turned their heads to listen, their own despair momentarily forgotten. When the ship finally entered the Bosphorus, the skyline of Constantinople rose from the dawn mist like a row of sharpened blades. Minarets and domes glowed in the new light. A vision of terrible beauty and immense power. For centuries, they had called it the city of the world's desire. Now, it was to be their cage. From the docks, they were paraded through narrow, crowded streets. Merchants, soldiers, and slaves paused to stare at the strange procession of Christian nuns, a rare sight even in this empire built on conquest. Finally, in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia, they were forced to kneel. The muezzin's call to prayer echoed from its towering minarets, a sound that was both hauntingly beautiful and a declaration of their defeat. Sister Dearest, her face a roadmap of grief, whispered, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." Their final judgment took place not in a dungeon, but in a hall of chilling grandeur, the Divan, Humayun. Light streamed down from high windows, illuminating the intricate tilework and the silent, powerful men who formed the imperial council. At the center sat the Grand Vizier, a man whose face was an unreadable mask. To his left, scribes waited with ink and parchment. Magdalena's eyes fixed on one of them, a man with a neat, dark beard and an intense, analytical gaze. He was not looking at them as women, but as entries to be processed, an equation to be solved. His name was Khatib Murad, and his task was to record their fate. The offer was repeated. The words, cold and formal in the vast hall. Convert, and be given a new life within the palace. Refuse, and face the discipline of faith. Magdalena trembled, the marble floor leaching the warmth from her body. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, Sister Dearest, old and frail but unbroken, stepped forward. Her voice, though thin, did not waver. My Lord, you may give us new names, but you cannot rewrite the prayers we carry in our hearts. The vizier's expression remained unchanged. His reply, relayed by the interpreter, was precise as a surgeon's knife. Prayers fade when the tongue forgets how to speak them. With a flick of his hand, it was over. They were dismissed, not to freedom, not to execution, but down a winding staircase, away from the light, into the waiting darkness beneath the palace. Their world shrank to a labyrinth of stone passages beneath the Topkapi Palace. Light became a distant memory, reduced to a thin, gray slit high on the wall of their communal cell. A sliver of sky that barely distinguished the suffocating darkness of day from the absolute black of night. They were stripped of their habits, the familiar weight of the wool, and the sacred feel of the crucifix replaced by rough, scratchy garments, the color of dried mud. Their new life was a relentless rhythm of servitude, a meticulously designed humiliation meant to grind holiness into drudgery. They scrubbed marble floors they would never be permitted to walk on, polished brass fixtures for officials they would never see, and fed fires in ornate braziers whose warmth was meant for others. Khatib Murad, the scribe from the vizier's court, was tasked with documenting their submission. He was not a cruel man, but a man of ledgers and order. These women were an anomaly, a column in his register that refused to be reconciled. He descended to the lower levels weekly, not with a whip, but with his inkpot and parchment. He assigned them numbers, erasing the names of saints and villages from their identities. Magdalena, who had once dreamt of illuminating manuscripts, became Captive 7. Murad would observe them from the shadows as they worked, noting their silent endurance with a mixture of professional frustration and a deeply unsettling awe. They did not weep. They did not complain. Their silence was a fortress he could not breach with his quill. The empire, finding that endless labor could not break them, began a more insidious assault. The first stage was a test of mercy. 1 week, their meager rations of stale bread and gray water were replaced with warm stew, briny olives, and soft goat cheese. Wool blankets, clean and thick, appeared on their straw pallets. A learned imam, a man with a gentle voice and kind eyes, was sent to speak with them. Your God and ours are not so different, he told them, his words echoing softly in the damp chamber. One path to the same truth. Accept the tongue of the empire, and you will be free. Magdalena felt the gnawing ache in her belly, quieted by the food, the chill in her bones soothed by the blanket. It was a powerful temptation, a poison disguised as honey, the promise of an end to suffering. But she saw the price in the imam's eyes. To forget the bells of Thessaly, the face of her abbess, the Latin prayers that had shaped her soul. To forget was the only sin they could not commit. When a week passed and none had whispered the words of conversion, the kindness vanished. The torches in the corridor were doused. plunging them into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight. The warm food was replaced with half rations of the old bread. The psychological war had begun in earnest. Faith was not to be torn out by force, but starved, chilled, and smothered in a slow, methodical silence. It was in this profound blackness that their true defiance took root. Deep in the labyrinthine tunnels, they found it. An old, sealed archway, choked with the dust and debris of a forgotten age. Prying the loose stones away with their bare, bleeding fingers, they discovered a small, dry chamber behind it, a pocket of silence untouched by the empire. It became their sanctuary. They had nothing, so they created. A shard from a shattered mirror, painstakingly shaped against the stone floor over many nights, became their cross. A broken piece of pottery held tallow stolen from the kitchens, a tiny, flickering candle against the immense darkness. Their chapel was built not of gold and marble, but of shadow and memory. Here, Magdalena, once the most frail and timid among them, found her strength. She became their memory keeper. In hushed, fervent whispers, she recited the psalms they had all but forgotten, her voice weaving fragments of scripture into a lifeline. Each night, after the great palace above them slept, they would gather in their hidden chapel. Magdalena took a piece of charcoal from a cold brazier and began to mark the stone wall. It was too dangerous to write names, so she drew symbols. A small, simple bird for each sister who was still alive. A tiny flame for the one who had been lost. 22 birds for the living. 1 flame for their abbess. Soon, the true erasing began. The guards' footsteps would echo down the corridor in the dead of night. They would call out a number, not a name. Captive 3. It was Sister Agnes. She was led away into the darkness and did not return. The next night, in their secret chapel, a profound and terrible silence fell, as Magdalena drew a single, deliberate line through one of the bird symbols. A few weeks later, another number was called. Another bird was crossed out. Murad recorded it all with his dispassionate, elegant script. His ledger, which centuries later would be found stained by wax and time in the Istanbul archives, told the story in its chilling emptiness. Beside the entry for Captive 3, the order was simple: unfit for service. Disposed. No date, no method, no grave. It was an erasure of ink and flesh. He watched them, these silent women, and saw not madness, but a discipline that unnerved him. When it was Sister Dearest's turn, the old woman who had faced the Grand Vizier, she paused before Murad as the guards took her. She looked at the quill in his hand, and a faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "When you write of me," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear, "call me Silence." From that day, none of the remaining sisters spoke a single word to their captors again. The seasons turned in the world above, marked below only by the subtle shifts in the dampness of the stone. By the time spring returned to the palace gardens, only 11 of the original 22 were still alive. The flock of birds on the chapel wall was decimated. One night, the footsteps stopped outside their cell. The guard's voice was rough. Captive 7. A strange and total calm settled over Magdalena. She rose without being touched. She walked past Murad, who stood in the shadows of the corridor, his ledger held tight in his hand. His face was unreadable in the torchlight. He was here to witness the final entry, to close the book. The walk was not long. They led her to a small, deep chamber in the palace foundations. A room that smelled of damp earth and finality. There was no crowd, no ceremony, just a single guard, a length of rope, and the waiting silence. She did not think of the pain to come. Instead, she thought of the light in Thessaly, the warmth of the sun on the olive leaves. She thought of the faces of her sisters, the sound of their defiant hymn in the burning courtyard. She closed her eyes. Her lips did not move, but in the chapel of her soul, she whispered a final prayer, a truth she had helped etch into stone and spirit. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. The empire could take her breath, but it could not extinguish the light. Her name was unknown to them. Her body would be forgotten, but her faint hymn, she prayed, would somehow survive the stone itself. In that echo, her story would endure.